Okay, so when I say the name Rambo, what pops into your head? Probably a muscle-bound, bandana-wearing, one-man army, right? But what if I told you the original Rambo, the one from the novel, was actually a tragic figure in a story that was never ever meant to have a sequel? Let's dive into the surprising literary origin of one of pop culture's biggest action heroes.
So, who is the real John Rambo? Let's just push aside all those explosive blockbusters for a minute. We're going all the way back to the source, a 1972 novel that introduced a character who was way different and honestly a whole lot darker.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll peel back that Hollywood shine to find the haunted veteran underneath. Then, we'll get into the wild origin story of his name, dissect the novel's main conflict, and reveal the shocking original ending. And finally, we'll look at how the Rambo legacy kinda got away from its creator.
First up, let's go beyond the action hero. Yeah, the Rambo you meet in the book, he's a completely different guy. The author, David Morrell, describes him as a nothing kid. He's ragged, with a long, heavy beard and hair hanging over his ears. This isn't a hero looking for a war. He's just a drifter, deeply haunted by what we now recognize as PTSD.
And this is absolutely key. Morrell himself said his novel was an allegory. You see, this book was never meant to be some celebration of violence. No, it was a commentary on the really deep, painful divisions in America over the Vietnam War. It was about these two worlds just smashing into each other, the soldiers coming back from the jungle and the fractured society they were trying to come home to.
So, where in the world did a character like this even come from? For our next section, let's look at how the name and the whole idea came together. Because this origin story is just as unexpected as the character himself. Picture this. It's 1968. David Morrell is a grad student, and he's watching the news. First, he sees this totally raw footage of a firefight in Vietnam. Sweaty, scared soldiers just trying to stay alive. Then, the broadcast cuts to scenes of anti-war protests and chaos back in the States. And it's that friction, that clash between these two realities that sparked the idea for a character who is caught between both worlds, but didn't really belong to either.
Now, about the name. The story behind his name is amazing, and it comes from two places that could not be more different. The first part, as Morrell tells it, came from the name of the 19th century French poet he was studying, Arthur Rimbaud.
And then, get this, just an hour later, his wife comes home with groceries. She'd picked up a type of apple she'd never even heard of before. Their name? Rambo apples. I'm not kidding, Rambo apples. And that's just a perfect example of how creativity works, right? The name of a French poet collides with an American apple, and boom! In Morrell's own words, he recognized the sound of force. John Rambo was born.
Okay, so let's get into the real heart of the novel, the conflict between Rambo and Police Chief Teasle. And this is so important. It is not a simple good guy versus bad guy story. It's a tragedy about two men, both shaped by war, who basically represent a nation at war with itself.
Just look at the parallels here. It's pretty incredible. Both of these guys are decorated war heroes. Rambo is the younger Vietnam vet, a Green Beret with the Medal of Honor, and he kind of represents the counterculture. And on the other side, you've got Chief Teasle, a Korean war hero with the Distinguished Service Cross. He is the establishment. He's all about order. They're really just two sides of the same war-torn coin, and they are headed right for each other.
We get right inside Rambo's head, and we feel his frustration. He's been hassled and kicked out of town after town just because of how he looks, and he's finally hit his breaking point. He's not looking for a fight, but he's just decided that's it. He is done being pushed around.
But then, just as quickly, Morrell flips the script and shows us Teasle's point of view. For him, this isn't about picking on some kid. It's about maintaining control. He's terrified that if he lets just one thing slide, his whole world, the order he fought for, will just fall apart. It's his own rigid code driving him, not just simple meanness.
And what's crucial is just how fast it all spirals out of control. Teasle pushes Rambo out, Rambo comes back basically just to defy him, he gets arrested, and then comes the breaking point. In the jail, the deputies try to forcibly shave him and cut his hair, and that is the trigger. That violation sends him into a violent flashback of being a POW. His training just takes over, he fights his way out, and leaves a dead officer behind. The manhunt is on.
All right, this brings us to what is maybe the single biggest, most important difference between the book and the movies. Let's talk about the original ending and how changing it basically created a billion-dollar franchise. In the movie, Rambo lives. He gives that really powerful speech and he surrenders. In the novel, not so much. In the book's final, brutal showdown, both of the story's main characters are killed. Both Rambo and Chief Teasel die.
Now here's the real gut punch. Rambo doesn't even die fighting Teasel. He's hunted down and killed by his own mentor, Captain Troutman, the man who trained him. It's this deeply tragic, definitive ending. There's no walking off into the sunset, no sequel. The story is just over.
So, why the change? Well, Morrell says it himself. It really boils down to business. The filmmakers knew that if you want to build a franchise, your hero has to survive. Keeping Rambo alive was a commercial decision, plain and simple, and it's what paved the way for all the sequels that turned him into a reoccurring action hero.
And that one decision, well, it had huge consequences. So let's wrap this up by looking at the Rambo legacy and how this character became something so much bigger than what was first written on the page.
You know what character has really made it when their name literally becomes a word in the dictionary? The Oxford English Dictionary actually credits Morrell's novel as the origin of the word Rambo. Today, we use it to describe anyone, from politicians to athletes, who take a super aggressive, go-it-alone kind of approach.
So what does the man who started it all think about this? This quote from David Morrell really says everything. He thinks of Rambo as a creation that just took on a life of its own, becoming something so different from the haunted, tragic man he first imagined. Like a son who grew up and got way out of his father's control. And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? When a character like Rambo becomes this massive global icon, who does he really belong to? Is it the author who wrote that first tragic chapter? Or is it the global audience that fell in love with the invincible action hero? It's a fascinating thing to think about, how stories change and how culture can reshape art into something completely new.